everyone. Just wanted to introduce you to our first 701 APA class. So glad that you are watching this, and I hope you enjoy this lecture. Wanted to let you know what it will look like throughout our time together. So what you can expect is we're going to cover 2 chapters during this time, and I'm breaking it up into 3 sections. So how this will look, we'll have a section, and I actually decided to create my lecture on a program called Sparkle, and it makes the lectures very visual, so you will see that when it comes up. And then after each section out of the 3, there will be a portion of a quiz, and you'll see me come back up again. I'll kind of give a summary of what we just learned and then ask the 5 or so questions that will come after each section. Feel free to pause, rewind, and the questions will be very based on the lecture that I provide. And feel free to ask me questions if you have them, and hope that you enjoy this, and we'll see you here in a few minutes after you watch first section of Lecture 1. Chapter 1 of the APA Manual talks about several ideas that writers should consider before writing for publication. First, we're going to look at several types of articles that exist in the world of publication. Journal articles are considered the larger umbrella for the many types of articles that exist. For example, there are reports of empirical studies, literature reviews, theoretical articles, methodological articles, and case studies. Let's look carefully at what each of these mean. According to the APA Manual, empirical studies are reports of original research. The typical flow of these studies include an introduction, a method section, results, and a discussion. Literature reviews allow the researcher to synthesize and critically analyze pre-existing publications. Typically, literature reviews contain the following types of information. 1. The researcher defines and clarifies the problem. 2. The researcher summarizes previous investigations to inform the reader more thoroughly of the research. 3. Identifies gaps, contradictions, relations, etc. in the literature. And 4. Finally suggests the next step for further solving the problems. In theoretical articles, writers use existing research literature to further theory. Actually, literature reviews and theoretical articles are very similar in structure. However, theoretical articles present empirical information only when it furthers a theoretical issue. Usually in this scenario, the writer examines a theory's external validity and internal consistency. Methodological articles, according to the APA Manual, present new methodological approaches, discussions of quantitative and data analytic approaches, and modifications of existing methods to the community of other researchers. These articles are mostly accessible to people who are well-read researchers. Though there are many other forms of articles, such as brief reports, book reviews, obituaries, and letters to the editor, we are going to discuss one more type of major article: case studies. Case studies are reports of case materials collected while working with individual people, groups, communities, or organizations. Case studies typically illustrate a problem. They help shed light on how the problem can be solved, and they also show what type of research is needed. Alright, so you just got to watch the very first section of Chapter 1. So, like the video showed, just want to keep in mind that we're discussing journal articles here. So when we think of journal articles, they're the umbrella, and there are different types of journal articles that we wanted to focus on. So we talked about empirical studies, and these are ones of original report that include the different sections that we typically write about as doctorate students. So if you've been here longer than a semester, you've probably done this in maybe Dr. Baki's class, or even any class that you've taken. This is a typical structure that we seem to use. Also, keeping in mind that there are other types of journal articles, such as literature reviews, and you may be somewhat familiar with this as well. This is where we take information that has already been created and we just synthesize it and actually turn it into a publication that takes a bunch of different pieces of information and narrows it down. You want to make sure that you define and clarify the problem, summarize previous investigations, identify relations, contradictions, and gaps, and also create next steps in how you're going to solve this problem. When we look at theoretical articles, it's somewhat similar to the literature reviews that we talked about. You're taking information that already exists, but you're trying to advance some type of a theory that's coming out of it. So you're wanting to figure out, how is this of any kind of importance for a theory that I want to convey. Next type of journal article, the methodological articles. I may have butchered that in saying it, but you get the point. So this type determine modifications of existing methods, discussions of quantitative and data analytic approaches. These are mostly written for people who are well-read researchers, so you probably will not publish this for those teachers out there or other certified counselors or anyone else who you might be reaching for an audience. Typically, it will only be for well-read people. Then we are going to, once again, we talked about case studies. So case studies is taking an individual, a group, different amount of people, and you're actually following them in order to illustrate a problem that might exist and then indicate a means for solving the problem. So this could have so many different topics. You can do case studies in so many different fields. Also, there are other types of articles that exist, but those were the main ones that we wanted to focus on. So now we're moving into our portion of the quiz. So what I want you to do, I'm breaking this up into pieces so that as you're taking the quiz, it's just chunks at a time. You can just go right back and review and figure out the answers. This first part of the quiz I have named Name That Journal Article. So it's not a very great game show, but it will do the job for what we're doing. So I have also uploaded this into Canvas, so you can listen to it from me or you can go and read it and check it out yourself. Feel free to rewind this video if you're looking for answers. Also, you can find these in the book. So take a look there. So the first question that I have for you is, what type of journal article illustrates a problem and a means for solving it while working with an individual, group, or community? So go ahead, you can write that down now or pause it, or you can just go straight to the homework guide. The question 2 on the quiz is, which type of journal article reports original research while following a sequence that discusses the introduction, method, results, and discussion? Number 3, which type of journal article presents new approaches and modifications of existing methods, and they are typically designed for only the well-read researchers? Number 4, which type of journal article includes synthesizing and critically evaluating material that has already been published? And last, number 5, what type of journal article is designed to draw on existing literature to advance theory? Alright, so those are your 5 questions, hopefully between the video and then my quick summary a few minutes ago, that you'll be able to pick these out. Hey, you might not even need the book, which is great, and if you do, I'll never know. So go ahead and write these down, and you can continue the rest of the quiz portion as this video continues. Alright, let's go on into section 2 of chapter 1. this next section, we are going to look at the ethical and legal standards in publishing. These come from the APA Ethics Code. In the APA manual, there are long-standing principles that are designed to achieve 3 goals. 1. To confirm the precision of scientific knowledge. 2. To protect the welfare of research participants. And 3. To safeguard intellectual property rights. When we look at this first goal, called confirming the precision of scientific knowledge, we see that there are 4 codes associated with it. The first one is Code 1.07, called Ethical Reporting of Research Results. With this, it is important to see how crucial it is to the scientific method that observations can be verified and repeated by others. Scientists should not falsify data, alter visual images or any kind of results, or omit troublesome observations from research results. Of course, it is expected that errors can still happen, but authors are required to be transparent about the errors that are discovered before or after publication. In Code 1.08, called Data Retention and Sharing, we see that researchers must be willing to share their data to the editor and other qualified professionals to answer any questions that may arise or confirm the analysis and results. Authors are expected to keep their data for at least 5 years after publication. Code 1.09, called Duplicated and Piecemeal Publication of Data, shows that results in the literature must be independent of separate research efforts. A person can't make a duplicated publication of the same idea or data in 2 separate sources. Also, it can be a piecemeal publication, which means unnecessarily splitting findings from one research project into multiple articles. Sometimes writers want to publish the same material in more than one place to reach different audiences. If someone does this, the original publication venue must be clearly and accurately cited in the paper's reference list to avoid self-plagiarism. Also, if you submit an article that stems from a prior publication, you must let the journal editor know. The final code in this section is Code 1.10, also called Plagiarism and Self-Plagiarism. As researchers, we must give credit where credit is due. We can't take the words and ideas of someone else and not give them any credit. Every time we paraphrase an author in words or ideas, we need to cite the source. Always use quotation marks to indicate the exact words of another. Also, we must cite our own previously published work if we use it in another article. In the next goal that the APA manual provides, called Protecting the Welfare of Research Participants, we see that in Code 1.11, called Rights and Confidentiality of Research Participants, that when a researcher writes a case study, it is imperative to protect the name and identifiable information of the person, group, or organization. However, be careful not to change the information so much that it would lead the reader to make false conclusions. 4 main strategies exist for achieving confidentiality according to the APA manual. Number 1, alter specific characteristics. Number 2, limit the description of specific characteristics. Number 3, add extraneous material. And number 4, use composites. In Code 1.12, conflicts of interest, It is noted that all information in the scientific discipline is meant to be unbiased. It is important that authors disclose any type of perceived conflict of interest that could exist. Reviewers are not supposed to review articles from close friends, collaborators, or recent students. Finally, reviewers have an obligation to keep a manuscript's confidentiality. The third goal listed in this study is to safeguard intellectual property rights. 3 codes coincide with this idea, which would be Code 1.13, Publication Credit. His authorship is set aside for those who have made a significant contribution to a published work. Lesser contributions are reserved for the notes section of the article. When determining order of authorship, it is best to decide the specific order as early as possible to avoid disagreements on the expectations. Sometimes the authorship order can be changed when one person does more work than what is originally expected. In Code 1.14, under Reviewers, we see that reviewers can't use unpublished work to further their own research agendas without the consent from the main author. Also, an editor must gain consent before consulting with another professional about some aspect of the manuscript. Finally, in Code 1.15, it's seen that the author's copyright on an unpublished manuscript is very important. It is good to note that authors are protected against unauthorized use of their unpublished manuscripts by federal statute. All of these codes are designed in order to protect authors in their manuscripts and to keep people in ethical standing according to these guidelines. Alright, welcome back. You just got to see the second video out of our 3. And as you hopefully noticed in the last video, that we're talking all about ethical and legal standards in publishing. And this is what the APA book is all about. Trying to take information from different disciplines, all kinds of pieces that might be slightly different for each field, but yet making a writing standard that matches across the board when it comes to journal articles. So when we look at this, there are 3 main goals, as you can see on page 11 if you're looking at your book. It's to ensure the accuracy of scientific knowledge, to protect the rights and welfare of research participants, and to protect intellectual property rights of people. So when we're looking at this code, we want to make sure that everything's fair, that people are treated ethically, that there won't be any issues that cause huge arguments or huge problems, and there are guidelines to help prevent negative situations that could come from publishing. So, for example, one of the big pieces that always come up when we talk about authorship. So instead of just saying, okay, well, after the pieces are written, we're going to decide who is author, that's just not what happens. It's not what the APA book recommends. They recommend that you first decide who will be first author and who will put in the most work. If something changes down the road and something happens and someone puts in more work, that's when they have to come back to the table and, I guess, quote unquote, renegotiate who will be the first author. So if they know this up front, there'll be less hard feelings later on, less issues. Just a great piece of advice that this APA book offers. Also, just keeping in mind little pieces that people don't always think about. Not creating duplicate publications, not taking one large study and saying, hey, we want to take this idea and put it in 2 separate sources to kind of give us more options and more publications. You just can't do that unless you've told the publishers and they have an agreement with you. Same with piecemeal publications. You can't, split your findings from one research effort into multiple different types of articles. You just can't do that. It just doesn't work that way. So keep this in mind when you're writing, that at least, if nothing else, the publisher needs to know this and it needs to all be made clear. There everything should be very upfront and honest when we're writing and when we're working with others. And thinking about plagiarism as well, that's just an ethical piece. We can't take anyone else's words or ideas without citing them. And honestly, we can't even take our own thoughts and ideas without citing them, because that's self-plagiarism at that point. It's very important to realize that you can't have any conflicts of interest if you're reviewing a publication or a manuscript for somebody and you find out that you know them, or that they were your student once, or anything along those lines. It's better safe than sorry. Just tell them, sorry, I can't do it. Someone else needs to review this, just because it's best to not have any bias in your work or when it's being reviewed either. And it's just another thing to keep in mind. It's not right for someone who has their publication declined and say, sorry, you can't use this. One of the publishers can't take that person's idea or their work without permission from the person who wrote it. And that seems fairly obvious, but I'm sure they put that in this book for a reason. It's probably happened before. So I thought something that was very interesting was on page 20. There is an ethical compliance checklist. So if you ever have an issue and you're not sure if you are doing the things the way that you're supposed to, and you're not sure if that's how it's supposed to go, and you want to know you're staying ethical, check out this checklist so that you can determine that. So that's a very handy piece of advice. So lots of information. Now we're going to go into our quiz section of the lecture. And at this time, you have the choice. You can either pause it here and just go get the document out and fill it out yourself, or I'll read the questions to you just so you know what they are, the next 5 of our quiz. And then once you've written these all down and you've filled out all 15 questions, you can just email me your answers. Obviously, don't share them with your peers, but at least you can give them to me and I can grade those for you. Alright, so section 2 quiz, these are mostly short answer questions. So number 1 is, what is the unnecessary splitting of findings from one research effort into multiple articles? So you can take a minute, write that down, and you can pause me if you need to, because I'm going to keep going with it, but that's the good thing about asynchronous courses, you can always pause me. Number 2, what is the publication of the same data or ideas in 2 separate sources? Number 3, what is it called when writers do not present their own previously published work as new scholarship? Number 4, how can 2 authors avoid issues in publication credit, specifically in defining authorship? And that one there is more of a short answer. Definitely no more than 3 to 5 sentences, I would say. So that's just a very short answer question. Number 5, true or false? Authors can review other colleagues' work even if they used to work together at some point. So can they review other colleagues' work in the publishing mindset even if they used to work together, maybe at the same university or at the same place? So go ahead and answer those questions. Once again, if you have clarifying questions for me, you know where my office is, and you can also email or call me as well. All right, y'all are doing great. We're making great progress through this lecture. We have one more chapter to cover, and you're about to watch the 3rd video in our total of 3 videos. So hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you back here in a few minutes. In Chapter 2, we will see manuscripts and their structure and content. There are 3 main components of what we will learn in this part of the lecture. First of all, we will see a definition and description of a manuscript. 2, we will see specific guidelines on content to be included in the manuscript. And number 3, we will see guidelines on how the part should appear in the text. Journal articles reporting standards were created to make a uniform way to write within the behavioral, social, educational, and medical sciences. Reporting standards are based on the research, implementation, and design of the study being reported. It is not about the topical focus of the study or about the journal that it could be submitted into. Let's look at some elements of the manuscript. There are certain sections that keep the flow of the manuscript consistent across disciplines. Let's dive right into the specifics. First of all, we must note that there is a title, as noted in 2.01. A title should summarize the manuscript's main idea. It should be concise and should identify the variables under investigation and the relationship between them. A good example from the book is Effect of Transformed Letters on Reading Speed. You can see that the variables effect of transformed letters is affecting another variable, which is reading speed. A title should be no more than 12 words long. In section 2.02, we see that the author's name and byline and institutional affiliation should be included in a manuscript. The institution affiliation is where the research was conducted, and the author's name should be the first name, middle initials, and last name. Omit all titles and degrees. In 2.03, in the author's note, we see that an author's note should include 4 paragraphs. The paragraphs will contain a complete departmental and institutional affiliation, any changes in affiliation, acknowledgments, special circumstances, and contact information. We should see that the author's note should appear on printed articles and identifies each author's department and institutional affiliation and any changes in affiliation. It contains acknowledgments and any financial support received and provides contact information. In 2.04, under Abstract, we see an abstract is a comprehensive and brief summary of the article's content. This allows those interested in the document to extract it from indexing and abstracting databases. This is one of the most important areas of the document because people typically read the abstract first before deciding to continue reading the article. A good abstract is accurate, non-evaluative, concise, coherent, and readable. Make sure not to exceed the word limit given by the journal that you are submitting your article to. Moving on to the next section, 2.05, Introduction, we see that the body of the manuscript starts out with an introduction that discusses the problem in the study and the research strategy. To make a quality introduction, you should discuss A. Why is this a problem? B. How does the study relate to previous work in the area? C. What are the primary objectives of the article? D. How do the hypotheses in research design relate to one another? And E. What are the practical implications of the study? The researcher must talk about why the problem deserves new research and how it fits into the field as a whole. Should describe relevant literature related to the topic, but it does not have to be an exhaustive account. You should avoid non-essential details as much as possible. Before you conclude the introduction, connect the previous and current work together and make sure to state hypotheses and specific questions. Also, it is important to note that it does not have a heading label before the introduction section. Now moving on to 2.06, the method. This section of the article describes how the study was conducted in detail. After reading the manuscript, an experienced investigator should be able to replicate the study. The methods section should be divided into the following sections. First, include the descriptions of the subjects. You can talk about items such as age, sex, ethnic and/or racial group, socioeconomic, level of education, gender, identity, disability status. Describe the procedures used in the study when conducting the methods section, and you should also describe any interventions and how they were delivered. Include sample size and sampling procedures, measurement approaches, and finally, include your research design in the methods section as well. Make sure to include any information in this section that would be useful to replicate the study. In section 2.07, in the results, we see that you will summarize the collected data and the analysis of the data. You will report the data sufficiently to justify your conclusion. Make sure to include all results, even results that you didn't expect or hope for. Do not omit anything because you're uncomfortable about the results. All descriptions should be unbiased, complete, and thoughtful. You will also want to include the statistical data you received as well as any experimental manipulations that took place. Section 2.08 is your discussion section. After presenting the results, the researcher can then interpret the results with respect to your original hypothesis. This is the time to examine, interpret, and qualify the results and draw any conclusions or inferences from them. Make sure to keep in mind any sources of potential bias and other threats to internal validity, imprecision of measures, effect size observed, and any other limitations found in this study. In your discussion, you should also discuss external validity and generalizability of the findings. Make sure to end the study discussing the importance of your findings. Moving on to 2.11, we'll take a look at our references. Our references provide a reliable way to locate and acknowledge the work of previous scholars. Make sure to take a look at the formatting. As we see at the end of the chapter, they give very good examples of how we should format all of the sections in this manuscript. In 2.12, we see that footnotes are used to provide additional content or to acknowledge permission and copyright status. These should not contain irrelevant, complicated, or non-essential information. Similarly, your appendix and supplemental materials are reserved for any material that would be too distracting to add to the body of the manuscript.
Alright, so you just got to watch our third and final video, and as you noticed, there's a lot of information here, and we're talking about manuscript, structure, and content. So we're going to go ahead and recap that really quickly, go over our quiz questions, and then you should be free to go. And I think we've learned quite a bit about the foundational pieces of this APA book. So when we look at this manuscript structure and content, we're looking at the overall picture of what our manuscripts should look like. In the coming weeks, I know that you all will go more in detail about each of these sections, how things should look, citations, and all the rest, but right now we're covering the foundational overall big picture. So it's important when we look at page 21 that the three main goals of this chapter are to provide a definition or description of each manuscript part, to give specific guidelines on content to be included, and then also guidelines on how the part should appear in text. So this is really helpful as you go back through. The video has already covered a lot of this, and this section is just a really good way when you're writing to go back and double check what you've done and make sure that all the pieces are there and that they are portrayed correctly according to the APA manual. So when we're looking at this, one of the big common themes that I noticed is that the writing style is oftentimes very just concise. It's getting to the point, including all the information that you need, and being descriptive enough so that someone else can replicate your study later on. I think that's a huge portion of it, especially when you get to the methods section, that someone else, a researcher, would be able to perform your study again and replicate it. It's also very important to just take a look at how things are done with the indentations, because everything is very precise and has a way that it's done. But if you go back and you look at, let me go to it real quick. If you look at page 41 and you keep looking all the way through, you'll find all the examples that you need. It gives very specific guidelines on how you should write, how you should indent, where everything should go. So this will be a great tool for us as we're writing throughout all of our classes and in our future careers as well. So if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to let me know. Hopefully the video covered most of the details that you'll need to know for your quiz. So let's go ahead and dive right into that. We're going to look at your quiz and then question number 1. And so question number 1 is create a title with an author's byline and institutional affiliation. And you'll find this in sections 2.01 and 2.02. So the main goal of this is I want you can make up the title. It doesn't have to be something you've already done or something that's being worked on. The main goal is to remember what it talks about with identifying the variables at hand. So go back and look at that section. And also you can add your name and your institutional affiliation. So I'm just wanting you to create a title and an author's byline and institutional affiliation and write that out on this paper for me. If that's confusing at all, just email me, text me, whatever you need to do, and I will definitely clarify that for you more. And number 2 on the quiz for section 3 is name the 4 components that create a good abstract. So what are the 4 elements that make your abstract the best that they can be? I think this is really important, and I think it's key because, as they said in the book, people look for your abstract first in order to decide whether they're even going to read it or not. Also, number 3, sorry about this dog. I'm outside recording this, so we're getting all kinds of noises. But number 3 is true or false. There is a heading label devoted to the introduction. True or false. Number 4, in which section of the manuscript should you go into detail about your research design, sampling procedures, and intervention? All right. Number 5, which section is used to supplement or amplify important information in the text? The goal of this section is not to include complicated, irrelevant, or non-essential information. So you'll be able to find all of the answers to these questions in the book or in the lecture video that I provided for you. But once again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything, feel free to reach out to me and I would be glad to help. So thank you all so much for watching this, and once again, sorry about some of the bird noises, and I'm outside right now recording this because it's such a beautiful day outside. But I look forward to seeing you all, and thanks for watching this lecture, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye.